At that moment, when the attack started, the U.S.S. Liberty had been surveilled many, many times by the Israeli Air Force, identifying our ship. They waved at us and we waved at them. But anyway, the attack started around 2 o'clock. The two men I just left in the forward gun mount were blown to bits, blown completely to bits. Every antenna on that ship was hit. Within 3 to 4 seconds, they were all down. We had no communication with the outside world. We had no ways to defend ourselves. They took out our 450 caliber machine guns with their attacking jet aircraft, Mystere and Mirage jets, that attacked our ship for approximately 25 to 30 minutes, killing and wounding as many people as they could on deck. We thought the attack might be over when the airplanes left, but little did we know. And we didn't know who was attacking us, Colin. We had no idea who was attacking us. We thought it had to be the Arabs because Israel was our best buddies in the whole wide world. Why would they want to attack us? In fact, we were happy to see them fly over us. We'd wave and they'd wave and drop their wings, and very friendly attitude. We didn't know who was attacking, as I said before, and we didn't understand who was attacking us till the torpedo boats got there. 3 torpedo boats flying the Star of David. We thought they were coming there to help us.
It all began with water. In the mid-1960s, Israel began to use the Sea of Galilee as a freshwater reservoir for the entire country, transporting water by canal to the Negev desert. Most of the streams which feed the Sea of Galilee flow from the Golan Heights, which was then in Syrian possession. Syria disputed this exploitation of a shared resource and began to dig a canal which would divert the Golan streams away from the Sea of Galilee. As soon as the digging started in 1964, the countdown to war was triggered. On the 16th of May 1967, President Nasser ordered the United Nations peacekeeping force out of the Sinai.
Nasser's surprise, the whole UN peacekeeping force, lock, stock, and barrel, picks up and leaves. And suddenly Nasser, who has been speaking very belligerently against the Israelis, who has been saying some pretty blood-curdling things about what he's going to do to Israel, suddenly Nasser finds himself with nothing between himself and the Israelis.
Now, Nasser overlooked the Straits of Tiran, Israel's access to the Gulf of Aqaba. With Egyptian forces commanding the straits, the Israeli port of Eilat could be cut off from the sea. The straits were an international waterway. Barring passage to a country's shipping was an act of war.
Up until the last minute, Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol has been trying to avoid this war. Israel's attack has isolated him even more. Eshkol's desire for a political solution is no longer an option.
Meanwhile, the American Sixth Fleet went on war alert in the Mediterranean. The Soviet Black Sea Fleet began moving through the Dardanelles in response. On May the 28th, Nasser announced, "We plan to open a general assault on Israel. This will be a total war. Our basic aim is the destruction of Israel." This firmed up Israeli resolve. Hawks and doves in the Israeli cabinet were united by Nasser's threat. And on the 4th of June, a national unity cabinet listened to 7 hours of military briefing, then authorized the Prime Minister to go to war. Israeli Prime Minister Eshkol told his new Defense Minister Moshe Dayan to commence hostilities on the 5th of June at 0745 Israeli time, 0845 Cairo time. The Israeli Air Force had been doing some routine number crunching. They were proud of their quick turnaround time and were interested to see how it would work in a war game. The Israeli Air Force could turn an aircraft around in 8 minutes. That means that from the time the aircraft touched down, it could be refueled and rearmed, pre-flighted and launched again in 8 minutes. The Israelis could do this 8 times a day for each aircraft. The question was, what if the entire Air Force was committed to operations at this tempo? How much damage could it then inflict during one single day? At 0800 hours Cairo time on the 5th of June 1967, the Egyptian Dawn Patrol took off.
In a well-organized Air Force, in a time of increasing international tension, what tends to happen is that air patrols are sent up from dawn, and they will overlap throughout the course of the day, so that there will be, in effect, a standing air patrol up over one's military bases, strategic centres, air bases, and so on. But it's surprising just how often a dawn patrol will go up and then land, and there will be a gap between the dawn patrol and the next patrol.
At 08:45, as if on cue, the Israeli dawn patrol disappeared from the Egyptian radar scopes.
Egypt's top military commander, Field Marshal Amer, is meanwhile touring the Sinai by plane, preparing for a war that has already started.
The Egyptian War Minister, Field Marshal Amer, was in an airborne command post aircraft with his Chief of Air Staff and a Soviet Air Commodore. Field Marshal Amer watched from the window of his airborne command post as a black cloud rose over the vast Cairo West airfield. Nasser had threatened Israel with war, and the Israelis had accepted the challenge. As Field Marshal Amer's pilot frantically looked for a safe airbase to land his plane, 10 of Egypt's forward airbases between Cairo and the Israeli border were destroyed by Israeli ground attack aircraft. As each pair of Israeli planes dropped their bombs, they turned and aimed their cannon and missiles at the Egyptian planes refueling on the aprons. They made 2 passes, spending no more than 7 minutes over their targets, then turned for the 20-minute flight home and a quick 8-minute turnaround. By 11:35 Cairo time, 250 Egyptian aircraft had been destroyed. 100 of Egypt's 350 pilots were killed. More were injured.
In about 3 hours, the Egyptian Air Force is destroyed. 280 modern jet fighters and bombers lost. It takes only 2 more hours to destroy the Syrian Air Force, and another 9 minutes to annihilate the Jordanians. Without air support, it will be virtually impossible for the Arab forces to win on the ground. 30 minutes after the air attacks have knocked out Arab air support, Israel begins its ground offensive.
By noon on the first day of the war, Israel had absolute air supremacy over Israeli, Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian airspace.
In Egypt, all information is controlled. The military disasters are kept from the Egyptian public. Jubilant crowds gather to listen as Radio Cairo announces victories. Each fictitious downed Israeli jet elicits cheers.
The United States and other nations had a vested interest in what was transpiring in the Middle East, and gathering intelligence was critical for both political and strategic military planning. What was the U.S.S. Liberty? Why was it in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea during the Six-Day War? Why did Israeli air and naval forces attack an American ship? Why was so much effort put into the cover-up after the event?
And on June 8th, the 4th day of the war, at 5 a.m., the American spy ship U.S.S. Liberty is now exactly where she shouldn't be, 13 miles off the Sinai Peninsula. Below decks, the communication technicians are hard at work, for there were crucial reasons the Liberty had originally been sent so close to the fighting.
We were tasked by the National Security Agency to find out if Russian nationals were piloting Egyptian planes.
At that time, there was concern in the United States about some Russian long-range bombers that were stationed at Alexandria. The United States was concerned about who was controlling these.
The Liberty is equipped with a unique 16-foot dish-shaped antenna, which is able to bounce captured intelligence information signals back to the NSA receiving station in the United States. But the Liberty's sophisticated spying equipment is not only monitoring the Arab states. Like a huge vacuum cleaner, it is scooping up intelligence from every source, not only Arab, but Israeli.
Exactly what our guys were doing, I would assume, is still classified today. Exactly what they were listening to. A lot of times material that is intercepted is sent out in the raw. That is, it's received encoded, sent out encrypted. We don't try to break it, so we can't read it anyway. We don't know what we've got.
The U.S.S. Liberty is now directly opposite the strategic town of El Arish. Israel had captured the town from Egypt 2 days before.
U.S.S. Liberty was a floating CIA intelligence gathering platform monitoring all transmissions from all sources involved in the 1967 Six-Day War. Israeli progress was followed as well as the Arab coalition of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, known as the United Arab Republic. As a result, Israel secured Sinai, all of Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. But Israeli intelligence had reported to Chief of Israeli Naval Operations, Admiral Issi Rahar, that a ship had fired upon El Arish in Sinai. This was proven to be a ruse. The only ship in that area was the U.S.S. Liberty, which flew the U.S. flag and was in international waters. In what was described by both President Lyndon B. Johnson and the Israeli government as a case of mistaken identity, Israeli air and naval assets attacked the U.S.S. Liberty on June 8th, killing 34 Americans and wounding 172 of the 294-man crew. Previously, the United States had announced that it had no naval forces within hundreds of miles of the battlefront on the floor of the United Nations a few days earlier. However, the U.S.S. Liberty was assigned to monitor the fighting. As a result of a series of United States communication failures, whereby messages directing the ship not to approach within 100 miles were not received by the Liberty, the ship sailed to within 14 miles off the Sinai coast. Also notified of the supposed attack upon El Arish were Colonel Shmuel Kislev, head of Israeli Air Force operations, and General Yeshayahu Benket, the head of Israeli Air Force intelligence. Kislev told his pilots that, quote, if they could confirm that it was a military ship, they could hit it, end quote. The naval contingent was also on the alert. Beneket wanted to have positive identification of the ship that may have been involved. Israeli Dassault Mirage fighters passed by and gave their report. The flight leader confirmed that it was an American ship. More Israeli fighters attacked at 14:05 hours for 20 minutes, firing cannons, machine guns, and rockets, and one report from the first pilot who hit the ship stated that oil was leaking. During that time, on board Liberty, radioman Terry Halbardier and Glenn Oliphant followed the captain's order and broadcast in the clear that they were under attack by unknown forces and needed assistance, but their communications antennae were then damaged. They performed a manual repair and began transmitting in the open as their secure channel was being jammed. The 6th Fleet received the SOS and informed the commander of the carrier task force on board the U.S.S. Saratoga, Captain Joseph Tully, who called and launched 12 F-4 Phantom fighters to assist Liberty. And the hotline between Washington, D.C. and Moscow was activated. Moscow was informed that American aircraft were being launched only to surmise the situation regarding the Liberty, not to get involved in the war. But as the Phantoms were en route just minutes away from saving the Liberty, it was reported that Secretary of Defense Robert Strange McNamara mysteriously had them recalled. The only way a SecDef could do that was by presidential authority. Johnson knew the truth, and he was part of the problem. The next wave of Israeli aircraft arrived after the Phantoms returned to the Saratoga, and these were Dassault Super Mysteers with napalm and canister bombs. One pilot called out the ship's identification as Charlie Tango Romeo 5, and that there is no flag on her. This was a strange report, as the previous recon flight clearly stated that there was an American flag, and the ship was identified as such. It is believed that this call was made as a ruse to cover the Israelis should these attacks be recorded by third parties. When that transmission was made, Colonel Kislev ordered all aircraft to stop the attack, as he believed that the ship was, in fact, American from the call sign. But the Israeli commander of the torpedo boat squadron, Moshe Oren, stated that he was not informed that there was a recall from an attack, and was informed, in fact, that it was the Egyptian freighter, the El Qasir. Therefore, he launched 3 motor torpedo boats. The order to halt all attacks, which followed the second wave of fighters, was supposedly not received by the naval assets, whose 3 torpedo boats launched 6 torpedoes at the Liberty, with 5 failing to hit target, but the one that did contact killed 25 men and wounded many more. This account is in great dispute. However, the Israeli argument of misidentification fails for several reasons, one being that, if they believed it was an Egyptian ship, why did they specifically jam the secure American radio frequency, which were specifically narrow bands? Another problem was the identification issue, in that the Liberty, at 10,150 tons, was 5 times larger than the ship they claimed to have mistaken for the Liberty. Both ships had totally different profiles. In addition, if the attack was a simple error, why were the Israeli jets unmarked, bearing no Israeli symbols, carrying no national identification, in violation of international law? Had the F-4 Phantoms from the Saratoga not been recalled, the torpedo boats would not have been able to engage, and the majority of the men would not have been killed and wounded. The official American position was that Israel called and said that they had recognized their mistake and the attack was over. So therefore, in response, McNamara recalled the jets. However, the attacks were then renewed for another 80 minutes. This was a strange development, since the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv reported that the Israelis had attacked a ship, but the nationality of the ship was yet undetermined by Israel. If this was true, how would McNamara know to recall the Phantoms, and that it was in fact the Liberty? The SOS was resent after the damaged antenna was repaired again, and it was picked up this time by the aircraft carrier U.S.S. America, and 2 ships were dispatched. 3 life rafts were deployed so men could get off the burning ship. But the torpedo boats focused their fire, destroying 2 of the life rafts and sweeping the decks to kill as many men as they could to prevent an evacuation. That act alone is a violation of the Geneva Convention, not to mention attacking a ship from a non-belligerent nation in international waters. Another strange development was when, after the 2-hour attack, the ship and crew headed to Malta, the 6th Fleet Commander, Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd, ordered the survivors to remove the ship's name from their uniforms. In fact, Admiral Kidd even ordered them to go ashore in civilian clothes, which the men were not supposed to have anyway. They were also told to grant no interviews and do not discuss the situation, even among each other. Otherwise, they would face court-martial and prison, or, even worse, for violating national security. Both Israelis and Americans involved had their opinions on what happened and why. One voice was that of Navy Captain Dr. Richard Kiefer, who was wounded badly himself but worked for 28 hours straight saving lives when he could. He received the Silver Star. Captain William McConaughey received the Medal of Honor for his efforts following the 13 repetitious attacks after his bridge crew were killed, himself badly wounded. His recollection was that the aircraft hit the ship from every direction in multiple waves. Since the attack involved the Israeli Air Force and Navy, that made it a combined arms attack, meaning that it was coordinated, which also meant that command authority came from the seat of government. The military did not simply attack an unknown ship in international waters, let alone an American ship, without orders. All the crew believed the ship was clearly identified as American, as there were reconnaissance aircraft that passed by close enough for the crew to look into the cockpits. Several high-ranking American military and political persons knew at that time that the attack was deliberate. The question was why. The cover-up was incredible. For example, the press was given limited information to downplay the event. The men were sworn to secrecy, and the Judge Advocate General of the Navy, Admiral Merlin Starling, was given only 24 hours to review the 600-page Court of Inquiry investigation report. He had great reservations about the veracity of the report. In fact, the Navy inquiry did not allow any testimony or evidence regarding the unmarked Israeli aircraft. No information was included about the life rafts that were shot up, or the electronics transmission jamming, or even McNamara's recall of the American fighters. This was the first and only time in U.S. history that a board of inquiry refused to accept testimony from American service members who survived an attack and only accepted the statements of the forces that had attacked them. Bill LeMay, a crewman, was given the name tag Smith, removed from a hospital ward with a dozen other patients and placed into a single room. A naval officer soon entered and told him that his name was now Smith, that he was never on the Liberty, and he was never to discuss the matter. In another completely absurd and totally insane turn of events, the Senate records, as well as the Medal of Honor Society, recorded that Captain McGonagall's Medal of Honor was earned in Vietnam, not off the Sinai Peninsula. His Medal of Honor citation mentions no specific geographic location and does not mention who the enemy was. Also, this ship's log was also altered to fit the Israeli timeline, supporting that only after 20 minutes of engagement, the ship was attacked for a total of 50 minutes and not 2 hours, breaking off contact after they realized their error. This was obviously not true. But why the cover-up? Why the attack? Over the years, logic mandates that the Israelis knew that the Liberty was a communications-gathering spy ship and would be listening in on all communications, Arab and Israeli. In May 1968, the Israeli government paid $3.32 million U.S., the equivalent of $28 million in 2022, to the U.S. government in compensation for the families of the 34 men killed in the attack. In March 1969, Israel paid a further $3.57 million, or $28.5 million in 2022, to the men who had been wounded. In December 1980, it agreed to pay $6 million, or $21.3 million in 2022 money, as the final settlement for material damage to Liberty itself, plus 13 years of interest. Several prominent Americans, generals, admirals, and even Medal of Honor recipients, as well as the surviving crew, have asked for a full congressional investigation into the attack and the cover-up for
The Board of Inquiry was made up of Admiral Isaac Kidd. He was a flag admiral, and Captain Ward Boston. He was the JAG officer that came along with Admiral Kidd. They interviewed all of us aboard ship. We told them what we saw, what we thought, where were you at, how come you didn't come help us, why would the Israelis do this? We opened our hearts up to them. We thought they were here for us. When we got through being interviewed, the Admiral said, listen, if any of you SOBs ever breathe a word about what happened to you and your ship, I'll guarantee you, you will end up in Leavenworth or worse. And we all know what worse meant. Our government had just abandoned us twice from not helping us, and then abandoned us by telling us we're going to end up in jail or death for telling the truth. So the Board of Inquiry that lasted 7 days was ordered by Lyndon Baines Johnson to find the Israelis, saying it was a mistake in identity when nothing could be farther from the truth. So the cover-up continues then as it does today, and it just seems like with technology like we have today, Colin, that we can reach out somewhere, and get the help we need. The American people got attacked. It was an act of war. You know what they were doing? They wanted to sink us fast, blamed it on Egypt, and started World War III. And that almost happened. We were this close to World War III if our ship sinks. By the grace of God, it didn't.
Now, we know that the Israelis sent Dassault Mirages and another aircraft in the first 2 waves. And as you stated previously, that they flew by, you waved at them, they waved at you. Some of the reports were saying that the Israelis claimed that there was no U.S. ensign flying from the masthead, which, of course, I don't believe for a second. And that it was an unidentified ship, that they thought it was an Egyptian trawler or a cargo vessel, which, if you do the comparative analysis of what they claimed they thought it was, there's no silhouette or nomenclature similarity whatsoever to the two ships. So were the aircraft unmarked, as has been reported?
The reconnaissance aircraft were marked with the Star of David. Mm-hmm. The attacking aircraft were blackened out. We couldn't tell who was attacking us. Mm-hmm. There was no markings on them. We just assumed it was the Arabs. When we got message out, probably maybe 5 or 10 minutes after the attack started, Rockstar, we're under attack by unknown jet aircraft. The Saratoga picked it up and the America picked it up. Saratoga Captain Tully launched a ready aircraft to come help us. Those were recalled. America launched. Those were recalled. It went back to base, and that's where they stayed. So yeah, there's a lot of missing. Well, there's not really a lot of missing puzzles. It's just a lot of missing truths and half lies and lies about this whole deal.
Well, having been a soldier and a Marine, serving in both branches, and having been on ships, and I know Navy protocol fairly well, as well as DOD. The only way that those aircraft would have been recalled was if that was an order issued through either SecNav, SecDef, maybe even the White House. Those aircraft should not have been recalled on a ship's captain or a fleet admiral's order without higher authority, in my opinion. What do you think?
That's exactly what happened. We went to the chain of command went to the higher authority, and it went to McNamara, and the admiral, I believe it was Admiral Martin. I could be wrong, but I believe it was Admiral Martin that asked for a clarification of the message traffic, that it was, not to help the Liberty. And then Johnson got on the phone and he said, recall the GD aircraft. I don't care if every sailor on that ship dies. I will not embarrass my ally Israel.
That's a pretty condemning statement. And I don't know if you saw, we have a video in Lyndon Johnson, but we went through a lot of his garbage, but we didn't mention the Liberty for a reason, because that is a separate video. But this will supplement that Liberty.
Finally, Boston writes that the late Admiral Kidd had personally told him that President Lyndon Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara ordered him to conclude that the attack was a case of mistaken identity, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
It's one of those situations where when political action takes over, then you're told by the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense to keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, and that's a direct order.
It was in 1984. About the Liberty, Helms said, "Since this is for the agency's record, I don't think there can be any doubt that the Israelis knew exactly what they were doing. Why they wanted to attack the Liberty, whose bright idea this was, I can't possibly know." Less than 2 weeks after the attack, Charles Roberts, reporting for Newsweek, cited a top-level theory that someone in the Israeli armed forces ordered the Liberty sunk because he suspected it had taken down messages showing that Israel started the fighting. President Johnson was the magazine's source.
It was a green light.
Amit also said that McNamara consulted President Johnson several times during their conversation, so there was no doubt he was fully informed. Fully informed of what? That is the critical question.
Eshkol and LBJ and their cronies together had a tight-fisted group that said, let's get this going. This attack was probably planned a year in advance.
Jim Ennis, an officer aboard the USS Liberty, later found evidence, meeting minutes dated from April 1967, from a secret group called the 303 Committee that revealed the Liberty was part of a larger plan, codenamed Cyanide, devised by Israeli and American intelligence to invade Egypt and overthrow its government.
Operation Cyanide was a joint Israeli-American venture using submarines and other covert-type intelligence gathering efforts against the UAR.
There was nuclear aircraft, SAC airplanes, on their way to Cairo, even before we got attacked.
In his book Operation Cyanide, investigative journalist Peter Hunem recounts a chilling story from the early hours of June 8, 1967. Jim Nanjo, a U.S. Air Force pilot stationed at Beale Air Force Base in California, was abruptly awakened between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. by blaring klaxons. He and his fellow aircrew quickly scrambled to their B-52 bombers, reportedly armed with thermonuclear bombs, and were ordered to wait at the end of the runway for further instructions. They remained there for what he said was 4 to 6 tense hours, awaiting a potential go code that could have sparked World War III. Finally, a coded message ordered them to stand down, and the emergency was over. However, Hunem noted something strange. The klaxons had sounded between the hours of 2 to 4 a.m., before the USS Liberty was attacked at 5 a.m. California time, suggesting that the U.S. military and President Johnson had knowledge of the impending attack on the Liberty. Meanwhile, back in the Mediterranean, the Liberty was under a deadly assault by Israeli fighter jets and torpedo boats. A declassified CIA document from November 1967, still partially censored, is quoted as saying the then Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan personally ordered the attack on the ship, and that one of his generals adamantly opposed the action and said, "This is pure murder." In 2017, Israeli newspaper Haaretz published transcripts proving that the Israeli pilots were aware the Liberty was an American ship. "This is an American ship. Do you still want us to attack?" "Yes, follow orders." "But sir, it's an American ship. I can see the flag." "Never mind, hit it." Whew, that sounds pretty definitive there. I mean, I do not know how you could still claim the attack was an accident. While the ship was getting bombarded, the crew of the Liberty desperately tried to send distress signals for help. The 6th Fleet, stationed nearby, received the calls and immediately scrambled rescue planes to aid the beleaguered ship. But inexplicably, no planes ever arrived.
Captain Telly, a friend of mine, he became a good friend. He's passed on now. He said, we sent our aircraft off. They were called by Washington from McNamara. Even before they hit the horizon, they were called back. That quick. They sent another volley up after it reconfigured, and then Johnson got on the phone. He says, "You better turn those GD planes around. I don't care if every sailor on that ship gets hurt or whatever, killed, but they left us out there to die."
But by the grace of God, the Liberty did not sink, and the crew, many badly injured, many dead, limped to the nearest U.S. port in Malta.
And when the Liberty arrives in Malta, the press is waiting.
Aside from the 9 bodies already flown to America, 22 more bodies are trapped below decks in compartments flooded when struck by an Israeli torpedo. The Liberty is still shrouded in secrecy. Newsmen are not allowed on board. Sailors on board are not allowed to talk to newsmen.
Whether on the ship or wounded in hospitals, the crew is kept away from the press. On June 14th, a naval court of inquiry into the attack is held aboard ship in Malta. It will be conducted by Admiral Isaac Kidd. But Kidd's first move stuns the crew.
He knew exactly what was going on and told everybody that this is classified stuff. You're never to talk about this to anybody.
We were all told that if we were to divulge what happened to anyone, we would be court-martialed.
Later, during a formal inquiry aboard ship, it becomes apparent to the crew that the Navy is not interested in conducting an in-depth investigation.
The court was ordered to conduct a complete investigation of all of the events surrounding the attack. Well, in fact, what they did investigate was just the communications involved at the time and the damage control procedures we followed. That's basically the scope of their inquiry.
During the court of inquiry, the USS Liberty is given a complete overhaul. It seems that the incident and all its evidence is literally being erased from history.
They patched up each and every rocket hole that we had sustained, over 800 rocket hits. They patched them. They patched the hole in the torpedo where the torpedo had come in. They came in, they restructured the ship, they put a new skin on it, and they painted it, and they sent us home like nothing had happened.
July 29th, the USS Liberty returns to the United States. Her crew is broken up, decommissioned, or given new assignments. And 3 years later, the USS Liberty is sold as scrap metal. In 1979, Jim Ennis published Assault on the Liberty, a book recounting the details of the attack from the crew's point of view. For the crewmen, it was liberating.